From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing, and Happy New Year's Eve. On the very last day of 2022, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a New Year address, hailing the hard-won achievements throughout the year 2022 and reining in the year 2023. Let's first of all take a listen.
On New Year's Eve, President Xi Jinping delivered his 2023 New Year address through China Media Group and the Internet.
"同志们、朋友们、女士们、先生们，大家好。2023年即将到来，我在北京向大家致以美好的新年祝福。2022年，我们胜利召开党的20大，擘画了全面建设社会主义现代化国家，以中国式现代化全面推进中华民族伟大复兴的宏伟蓝图，吹响了奋进新征程的时代号角。"
Now, for more on the year 2022 and the New Year expectations and resolutions, and also interpretation of President Xi's New Year address, we have in our Beijing studio Einar Tangen, political and economic affairs commentator, and also Ding Yifan, senior fellow at the Taihe Institute. Very warm welcome to both of you. Has been a while since I have two guests in the studio with me.
Good evening.
Says a whole lot about our COVID policy optimization. Finally, let me start with you, Professor Ding and Mr. Ding. The past year has been extraordinary. I mean, so many challenges. It's been a tumultuous year in many ways. What has been the year for you, like the year 2022 personally?
Personally, I think that 2022 for me is a recovery year. I started travel. It means that the pandemic has been somehow under control. So I traveled 5 times in
Wow.
Hainan, in Fujian, in Jilin, in Zhejiang, and the last travel was in Hefei, in Anhui. So I traveled a lot, so I visited a lot of pilot enterprises, how they conducted the experimentations in a lot of sectors, and then I visited, I give some lectures also.
Any plan to travel internationally soon, perhaps?
Oh, it depends, because a lot of countries are suspicious about the case of China's pandemic. So if China come to the end of the pandemic, caused a lot of concerns. So,
Einar, you've been on tons of media, international news media, as a commentator, as a thought leader, as an opinion leader. What has this year, the year 2022, been like for you?
Well, it's been odd. I mean, I still kept up about 14 shows a week, but obviously doing them from
Half of them
studio.
Here.
No, actually about 40% here.
Okay.
Anyways, but I'm serious. It's things, but you know what it really struck me is the difference between the rhetoric and the reality. I mean, because of the isolation and things like that, people's ideas about China became odder and odder through the year. And it was as if people were looking for something to criticize China, and the international press was doing it. But I'm living here in Beijing, and the reality is completely different. And I tried to express that to people, and people were like, "Oh, you're just putting a good face on this. It couldn't possibly look. Everyone says it's bad." I said, "Yeah, everyone who hasn't been here says it's terrible. Anyone who's actually here will tell you the truth." So it's been the difference between rhetoric and reality, but I really do think that 2022 we've bottomed out, that's as low as it's going to go, and that I think from here on it's going to be better.
I think that's also the message from the Chinese president in that New Year address. I thought that was a very encouraging address where he talked about the shared experiences of the past year. He said kudos to everyone. It's not easy for anyone. Kudos really to everybody. We've been through this together. We're about to see the end of the tunnel. It's a message of hope. What messages did you pick up from the president's New Year address?
So it's the end of the pandemic. So we hope that next year will be a completely new atmosphere in China, in the world. We hope that maybe 2023 might be bring us more expectations than the last 3 years, because the pandemic went rampant during 3 years. That caused a lot of damage to public health, but also to the economy.
Yeah.
Well, it's once again, he was stressing that China is going to follow. What I take away is he's stressing that China is going to follow what it thinks is right. Often in the past, China has responded to talk points or narratives that are coming from the United States or Europe or elsewhere. He talked about the headwinds, but it was positive. He talked about the work that had been done at the at the party conference. He talked about the plans, about the future, and it was very positive, very forward-looking, but very clearly China has accepted. And I go back not only to his address, but to Qin Gang's address, where he said there are going to be differences in 100 years. There are going to be differences between Asia and other places, as well as other places, Africa, South America. Yes. There are differences, but there's a way to work through those, and that's through acceptance. So I think China is taking a new leaf, and they're just saying, look, we're going to do what is necessary to help our people. They're going to continue to try to battle poverty and all of these things. So I think that's the main message. China is going to go its own way and pay a lot less attention to.
And I was pleasantly surprised when the Chinese president talking about the fact that we're a country of 1.4 billion people. People have their own opinions, and not necessarily they're not agreeing on things 100% necessarily. It's normal to argue and debate, and eventually, hopefully, we can come up with a collective decision and move towards a collective future. And I thought that was a brilliant episode. Professor Ding, what points did the president's address take out to you?
Oh, just confidence, just confidence and insurance. He tried to assure Chinese people that 2023 will be a new year with a lot of hopes, with a lot of, we have to do all efforts, we have to move forward. And then as the pandemic is touching the end, so a lot of expectation for next year, for 2023.
Yeah, certainly messages of hope and encouragement towards the future. Of course, the Chinese economy has been watched closely by China watchers, by global investors, and by people here at home who are either underemployed, who are unemployed, or who are looking to make more money in the future. President Xi did talk about the Chinese economy and the challenges it faces. Let's take a listen.
我国继续保持世界第二大经济体的地位，经济稳健发展，全年国内生产总值预计超过120万亿元。面对全球粮食危机，我国粮食生产实现19连丰，中国人的饭碗端得更牢了。我们巩固脱贫攻坚成果，全面推进乡村振兴，采取减税降费等系列措施，为企业纾难解困，着力解决人民群众急难愁盼问题。
People have been talking about the Chinese economic recovery. What do you think a recovery would look like in the year 2023, if any?
Oh, it depends. It depends. It depends because you don't know whether this pandemic is completely finished.
Yeah.
So it's completely over. Or it might be some variation of the virus. We don't know. We didn't know. But globally speaking, I think that if the pandemic definitely end up, and then Chinese economy will have a revenge of growth. I think in these cases, we are expecting a wave of consumption. Just look at what is happening in Beijing. in those cities just have the last round of
tourism, restaurants,
service,
retail sales, travel.
Service activities will again become the very, very hot activities in China. And apart from these, there is a new momentum of investment. The investments increasing both from domestic investors, but also from outside investors, from especially from Europeans.
Which sectors are they looking at? Are they, favoring at this point?
Especially manufacturing sector that need a lot of energy, because the energy price is several times higher than in Europe than in China. So some European companies are moving their production from Europe to China. The case of BASF decided to invest in 8 years more than 10 billion euro in Zhanjiang to build up a complex, very sophisticated, because BASF use a lot of natural gas as the raw materials, while the natural gas's prices in Europe is 4 to 5 times higher than that of in China. So you cannot afford to maintain your industrial productivity.
I definitely would take advantage of the price advantage. Yes. Einar, what do you think? What would be the prospect of the Chinese economy in the coming year?
Well, I agree. I mean, revenge or V-shaped, however you want to put it. Chinese consumers are looking, but it's also about confidence. And a lot of it, I completely agree with my colleague. It's about whether people believe the virus is gone. If they do, you're going to see small, medium-sized business entities looking for opportunities, starting up little shops, doing what is necessary. And that is absolutely crucial. I mean, we can talk about, spending, and definitely consumption is there, but how do you get consumption? Wages. And who produces the jobs? 90% of new jobs are small, medium-sized enterprise, 80% of existing jobs. And they've had the hardest time over the last 3 years. So I'm really looking forward to confidence boosters, where the government is clearly aiming.
What could be some of those confidence boosters so far? I mean, judging from what's happening right now.
Well, they've reduced a lot of red tape to set up the types of companies. They've also reduced the taxes. So for a lot of these entities, they're basically tax-free. So you can go out there without having the government as your partner, as they say, and you have a free, in essence, you can start a business very, very quickly, and hopefully it'll be profitable. But this is really, really important to China. Globally, there are a lot of things that China can't control. And those are, the geopolitical issues with the United States, an overall recession that's happening. I mean, the Japanese economy is really facing huge headwinds. They're way over 250% of debt to GDP. These are worrying concerns. And then you have the developing nations who are also facing a lot of debt issues. And you haven't seen a global consensus coming together truly to address those things, whether it was COP27, 15, debt issues. These have not been resolved. And these countries can't pay back. And there's all this rhetoric about China's the big debtor. In Africa, China is about 15 to 20% of total debts. 65% of the debt is held by first world nations, private banks, individuals, and things like that. But there's no movement to do it. All you hear is China should figure this out. China should solve this. I mean, so there, as I said, once again, rhetoric and reality, real difference.
Yeah, Professor Ding, what do you think when it comes to picking up the confidence boosters? What about stimulus packages that the Chinese government can offer to enterprises, to consumers at this point?
First of all, there is a so-called dual circulation strategy. Dual circulation strategy development. So Chinese government will put more money, public money, in rural areas construction. So that will create a lot of opportunities. Nowadays, as China is having its automation of manufacturing sectors, so more and more robot has been introduced in production chains. So we need less labor forces, while most of the labor forces come back to the rural areas because they came out from the countryside to fulfill the lack of labor forces in 90s. And
what are they going to do afterwards?
They will create a lot of activities. They will try to create some
revitalize
the countryside, and especially we have some public policy to support the entrepreneurship. They will create a lot of enterprises. They will try to create some value-added activities in rural production. Because in agricultural production, you have fewer added value in these. But if you proceed some food industries into these sort of activities, you could add some value into your production.
You've been doing quite some field trips to enterprises in some of those provinces you just mentioned. What did you see on the ground in light of China's COVID policy relaxation?
No. I visited a lot of companies that is specialized in, for example, digital economy, in platform that Chinese economy will offer to unify all these production chain sectors. So in some areas, we are unifying those markets. So offering some new technologies, some platform for all these different sectors of the production chain to get together. So that will make the production chain more effective, more efficient, and less costly, because that will wipe out a lot of red tape works.
And this is really important. If you're watching this and you're wondering how China is going to go forward, it's not just the stimulus plans, it's the efficiency. There's so much emphasis. If you go to Huawei, they're talking about how they're designing chips that are less expensive, more powerful, and consume less energy. And your work in terms of the production, the production cycle and the chain, this is very important, because China, this is the way that China competes in the future. It's not going to compete on wages, right? You can get cheaper wages in Bangladesh, but if you were talking about what is the total cost, all right, and time necessary to produce an item, China wants to stay in the game by being more efficient.
Yeah, it's all about boosting productivity. In the New Year address, the Chinese president did talk about China's foreign policy. He talked about the fact that the number of foreign leaders and dignitaries visited Beijing not so long ago, soon after the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. Of course, the Chinese president also visited a number of countries participating in climate change talks, in multilateral negotiations, visiting a number of countries, most recently, for example, Saudi Arabia, and met with the leaders of the Arab world. Let's take a listen to what the Chinese president said about China's foreign policy in the year 2022.
今天的中国是紧密联系世界的中国。这一年，我在北京迎接了不少新老朋友，也走出国门讲述中国主张。百年变局加速演进，世界并不太平。我们始终如一，珍视和平和发展，始终如一，珍惜朋友和伙伴，坚定站在历史正确的一边，站在人类文明进步的一边，努力为人类和平与发展事业贡献中国智慧、中国方案。
Of course, the Chinese president said that he believes China stood on the right side of history when it comes to China's foreign policy making in the past year. Einar, how would you describe China's foreign policy in the past year?
The past year there's been a certain number of headwinds. Obviously, the Ukraine situation, the U.S. continuing to pound on China in terms of this trade war, which became a tech war, which is now threatening to become a Cold War. And China's been responding by trying to keep the door open, at least in its mind. Internationally, people say, oh, every time China responds to some sort of negative act, for instance, the U.S. says, you can't have any chips, and we're not going to allow you to have any machines to make chips. And China says, well, okay, we'll have to figure out a way to do a workaround. Oh, that's aggressive. You're trying to rule the world. So, I mean...
Yeah, to borrow the new Chinese foreign minister, China is not necessarily the wolf warrior, but China is dancing along with a bunch of wolf warriors out there.
Yeah, but this is
Qin Gang,
yeah, I know, but it seems kind of odd if I come up to you and slap you, all right, and you raise your hand. I said, "Oh, you want to fight with me?" It doesn't seem real, and this is what I'm really. I keep coming back to this: the real difference between what I see internationally on all of these channels, all of these pundits, versus what the reality I see here in China.
Yeah. What do you think, Mr. Ding?
I think that for some part, the United States and the Western world consider themselves as the international community, as only they represent something very important in the world. But now we are living in a multilateral world, in a multipolar world. We should conduct our diplomacy multilaterally. So I think that in 2022, China have conducted its foreign policy in various directions. Lastly, the summit between China and Gulf country. That's a good example how China will look at the world. In Middle East, China is welcomed in Middle East. China in Africa, China is welcomed by all these African countries. The summit Africa and China showed that China has more attractive than the United States, for example. Biden administration wants also to make something happen, make a lot of promise to Africans.
It's really interesting when you talk about China's foreign policy making and you sum it up as a multi-directional.
Yes.
Can you specify it for our audience? You talk about the China Gulf Cooperation, China-Africa Cooperation. Besides them, what else?
And RCEP. People often overlooked the effect of the RCEP, but because of the RCEP, this year's international trade, regional trade, is booming. So creating a lot of activities in this region, and also because of this RCEP, which is coming into force this year, have brought a lot of jobs, new jobs in these areas, and that will create the whole economy in Eastern Asia, the most dynamic supply chain in the world.
Yeah. And I just want to, it's not just East Asia. I mean, you're starting to see a real division between the developed northern economies and the emerging and developing world. It used to be called Global South, but I think you have to include Central Asia in there. And there's this rift. And it's not that China is asking anyone to choose, as the United States is, but simply the fact that the U.S. keeps making promises with very little delivery. COP15, all of these, there's nothing out there. So at this juncture, the U.S. is not delivering on anything. China is. Look at all of the leaders that wanted to meet with Xi Jinping. I mean, look at the failed forums that Biden held. I mean, he insulted the
Summit of the Americas, where presidents of half a dozen countries didn't show up. Yeah. I do want to ask you guys about one thing. That is the newly appointed Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang, the current or the outgoing Chinese ambassador to the United States. He served in that post for almost 2 years. We met him right before he left. He struck me, of course, as a very sharp and intellectual and globally minded diplomat. But I just want to get your thoughts on this appointment made by the Chinese president and, of course, approved by China's parliament, legislature. What does it suggest and signify? Some say that China is about to end its wolf warrior diplomacy by appointing Qin Gang as new foreign minister. Isn't necessarily so. What is it all about?
Well, quite frankly, the new spokesman talked about. It was very clear that he's tired of this disinformation campaign that is put out there. So the wolf warrior was kind of like, "Oh, you did it. No, you did it." That's out. China is just simply going to say, "Look, you're spreading disinformation. You shouldn't do that." Right? And it just be very clear and direct. And I think that's going to be Qin Gang's hallmark. He's going to be very straight, and it's less trying to, mollify us as the U.S. Oh, what do you need? What do we have to do? Do we have to buy stuff from you and things like this? And more just directly as equals. Look, we have a duty to do what we can for the entire world, not just us. And it's time that we sit down and do that. And I just don't know how well that's going to mix with the current Biden administration. They don't seem to have a real strategy towards China. It's kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You know, Biden shows up, has a nice meeting with Xi, and then he goes back home and starts putting new tariffs on China.
That is the story of life in Washington in the Beltway. What do you think about this new appointment of Qin Gang, the new Chinese foreign minister?
I think that Qin Gang is a very experimented diplomat. So he not only has been ambassador to Washington D.C., so he had some contact with the United States, but each time when he wrote papers published by American newspapers, or when he responded to questions to American journalists, he had a global vision. He talked not only bilateral issues, but also he tried to put the bilateral issues in a global vision, in a global context. That's something very important, because as a foreign minister, he should keep in mind that China is the global power. China have to deal with the global development agenda. President Xi Jinping just proposed a global development agenda. So we have to take into account not only our bilateral issues or bilateral dispute, but a larger picture of the global development, global economy, even global political stability.
I just want to add one thing. The people in Washington, especially the Biden administration, did not look to engage Qin Gang. Now they lost a real opportunity. Now there's a lot of grinding of teeth. And he said, oh, maybe we should have talked more to that guy. One of the reasons he was going to the press, which is highly unusual for a Chinese ambassador, is because he wasn't able to get his message directly across. Now they're going to pay a lot more attention to him.
To be fair, former ambassador Cui Tengkai was excellent as well when it comes to dealing with the press. But previously, it was not a hallmark of Chinese diplomats overseas. But we do see the change over there, and especially when Qin Gang was on Face the Nation on CBS. The interview with Brennan was brilliant, I thought. After all, how many foreign ambassadors can come to a Mandarin Chinese primetime show and discuss politics, right, and international relations?
Not a lot.
One last question about China-U.S. relations. Do you think it has bottomed out, or at least there's a window of opportunity in the next year or so for it to stabilize and go on a smooth journey, relatively speaking?
No, I don't see it. Biden has lost the House of Representatives. It's going to be full of Republicans who are going to try to use China as a domestic blunt object, saying that we're tougher on China than you are, and he'll have to respond by, quote, doing something tough against China. So I don't see any daylight for a while, at least 2 years.
Einar, Mr. Ding, I consider both of you my friends. Happy New Year's Eve. Thank you for coming on our program.
Same to you.
All right, and with that, we come to the end of this episode of The Hub on CGTN. On behalf of my whole team, the photographers, my editors, thank you so much for tuning in. Happy New Year. Have a great one with your loved ones tonight. Bye.